Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
You are watching a Fact TV presentation of the WNESU School Board meeting.
All right, it's actually 6 o'clock, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the board meeting of the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union. I'll call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Let's do a quick round of introductions, especially for the public, starting.
Jim McCall, represent the Rockingham School Board.
Karen Blanchard, Westminster School Board.
Lynn Morgan, Athens School Board, Athens Grappling.
Jim Vazina, Finance, helping Andy Foss, our superintendent.
Team BLC, Westminster School Board.
Right on top. Andy Haas, superintendent.
June Streeter, representing the high school.
Cheryl Charles, representing Westminster. Priscilla Lambert, representing Rockingham.
Jason Terry representing Rockingham.
And Chris could be joining us.
Very good. Hey, Chris, introduce yourself, please.
Hi there. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Chris Kibbe, Rockingham School Board, and treasurer of the WNESU, and various other things too. But that'll do.
Vice Chair. Board.
Vice
That's-
chair of the WNESU as well. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I
So
did.
let me ask, there are any adjustments to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Let me then ask if there are any communications and public comment. Any from the public? It appears not. Then I would entertain a motion to review and approve the minutes from October 18th. You've all been sent a copy.
I'll move approval.
Thanks, Briggs. Jim McAuliffe has moved to approve the minutes from October 18th. Any discussion, please?
Question.
Sure.
On the last bullet of the superintendent's report, it's confusing to me. I don't know if there was a mistake or if I'm just not understanding. On the third sentence, we failed to test from FY 21 to FY 22 because we budgeted more than we used. But the next sentence says, this is a situation where budgeting less was not because we budgeted more than we used. Oh, budgeted less was not in our favor. So one says budgeted more, one says budgeted less. Is that a mistake, or could somebody explain this?
Sure, yeah, good question. Let's have Andy take a look at that.
Reading through it right now. Bill?
It's an important section. Thank you.
It's not in our favor. So, I think what the intent there is to say that by trying to save money, it didn't work in our favor.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I'm trying to save money.
and I think I want to go back and look at my actual, what I wrote, and maybe we could correct that, but that was the intent of what that is that by not spending what we had budgeted, it actually was not in our favor.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I remember that conversation.
Mhm. So I actually think it doesn't need changing when you read it. With the additional discussion, it makes sense. Any other, that was not a change. Any other questions or corrections of any kind?
Dean's name is spelled wrong in Beal, so on page 3 of 4, it's spelled 2 different ways and 2 different places.
I think Cheryl's name is spelled incorrectly on one too. It has an A instead of an E.
So then members in attendance are all spelled correctly at the top. If the other names could be corrected, that would be.
Yeah, Tim's name's spelled on page 3.
Yeah, Beals.
All right. So we have a motion on the floor I wondered if we might call for a vote to approve the minutes as corrected with the spelling. Corrections, that's all. Okay, thank you. Jigs actually had already moved. Yeah. So with that, all those in favor, let me start actually with Chris, since he's remote. And your vote, please, on approval of the minutes.
Yes.
Thanks. And in the room, I will just do it unanimously. Yeah. Anybody opposed? No. Okay, thank you very much. Minutes approved. So now we're moving into reports, and we have a special guest tonight. So I would ask Andy to make the introduction.
Sure, I'm gonna try and do two things at once of that. I'm gonna try and share this screen for everyone, so everyone's, yeah, okay, good, I got that up. So Brett Bishop from Focus Schools is here. We have been working with Brett for 3 years now?
Yeah, it's third year.
So we start, you push the big button and you move forward. We started working with Brett back during when we had COVID, and we were coming out of COVID and doing our recovery plan. And so Brett and his organization helped guide a lot of the work we did during that time of developing our recovery plan, which has led into some strategic planning, but has also led into the work we've been doing the last couple of years around instructional leadership teams, and helping our schools become better institutions to serve our kids. And so Brett was available to come and just talk about the work we've been doing and where we're going. So I'll give it to you, Brett, at that point.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you me for the opportunity to be here with you this evening, and the fact that it's not snowing. I make this drive quite often now. And I'm always thankful it's not snowing. So beautiful drive up. So as Andy mentioned, I work with Focus Schools, and the time that I spent in my career as a teacher, as principal, and now doing this work has all been sort of organized around, as Andy mentioned, just trying to find ways that we can just do good work for kids. And so Focus Schools, in this particular slide here, we talk about us a little bit and our history. For the last 23 years in multiple states and even abroad, doing work around these notions that you see here. Some of them going to what Andy talked about with the idea of how do we organize ourselves in schools so that the goals that we have, we make progress toward them, that we are very intentional. There's some research-based things that we know when schools make really good improvement for their work that they do for kids often happen. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of those things, but Andy mentioned this idea of having instructional leadership teams. So that's that concept of the distributed leadership. So it's not just a principal or a small group of administrators leading the school, that the instructional leadership team would include teachers and lots of folks who are getting lots of fingerprints on leadership. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing I just want to highlight here in this slide, we think about how important it is to make sure that all means all, right? So our schools are designed to serve all of our kids. And so we want to make sure that we're one of those places where we don't just sort of hope that's happening. We actually are ensuring that that's happening by the way the leadership is checking in and setting goals, doing work. And this concept we'll talk a lot about is this idea of one thing. So that we organize, we know if there's one thing we can be sure about in every school, there's nobody who's saying, gosh, I don't have anything to do. Everybody is so busy all the time. And they're working so hard. They're exhausted at the end of the day. They're exhausted at the end of the week. But a lot of times what's happened is because we're trying to be so many things for so many people, we can't get good at anything. And so organizing an organization, getting us to be around one thing, so that one thing the data would say to us, if the answer to the question is, the question being, if there was one thing that we could get really good, if our kids got really good at one thing, that we would say then all things would get better. What would that one thing be? What would the data tell us? And so trying to organize schools using data, there's people in every school building who know a lot. How do we get organized around that? How do we even pick that? How do we get that? And if we get narrowed in our focus, we would refer to that as a targeted learning focus. If we get a targeted learning focus centered in our work, what we see is remarkable improvement. And when I was a principal and someone told me this, I was very scared because I said, wait a minute, we need to improve in more than one thing. There's lots of things that we're sort of on the list for, but they convinced me very clearly that, yeah, but if we get really good at picking this target learning focus, all those things will get better. So there's a little bit of a journey that schools get on, and we can talk more about this as we go, but I'll just introduce a couple of things that are happening currently. So you see in this slide, this talks about the work that's going on right now. We started, as Andy said, with that recovery team. There are some people who are at the table now who are on that team. We used some data that was required by the state of Vermont to say, all right, well, what are the things that we want to organize ourselves around? What's the data tell us that we need to do really good work with kids to get to a place where, you know, all of the world essentially lost 2 school years. In some cases, kids lost a lot during those times. And it was really hard to figure out how to do school when we can't have kids in the school building and all of that. So the data that that team used helped us to organize ourselves, and we'll mention that a little bit. But what we then start to do is to say, as we get this recovery plan in place and the strategic action plan, the work that the administrative team and others have done, we now have to say, well, the plan isn't just good enough. We have to then have an infrastructure to make that plan happen. And so the things that are going on here, this is the work that's currently happening, involves things like a monthly, we just had it last week actually in this building, a training for what we refer to as instructional leadership teams. So all the teams from all the schools come together and we do a little new learning. We do a little looking back on how to go since the last time we were together, and then a little planning on moving forward to say every school has some things that we're all going to learn about, but every school is also different. So they need a chance to adapt it for there. It's very different to be in a high school, for example, than it is to say be in an elementary school. And even though we're all in the same supervisory union, we have different institutional memory, we have different staff. So we want the leaders at the school to be able to take the learning and then apply it to their building as they see the work. So we have some things here that are talking about what we're doing, and the idea of empowering teams is one of those things where we know that there are team times in schools that adults are knee to knee and eyeball to eyeball, but oftentimes there's not clarity around what are those things supposed to result to, and how can we get them to channel all toward that one thing that we're working at, and how can we make sure that we're measuring our progress along the way. This implementation of a targeted learning focus, you also see mention of evidence-based practices there, because one of the steps that happens once we decide what's that one thing that the kids are going to get really good at, we then have to say, well, how are we going to choose a narrow set of evidence-based practices that the adults are going to get really good at that will then get the kids to be making progress? And so there's some processes built in there. And this was work that was done last year where we did a lot of that identification. We identified at each of the schools a targeted learning focus. We identified evidence-based practices that the adults would get good at, a narrow set, very small. We also identified a goal. We refer to it as a SMART E goal, a SMART-E goal that is saying, well, if we're doing really well with this, how will we know? What's the progress that we're going to make, and how can we measure it? And what's it look like? And then lastly, a targeted professional development plan so that we know some adults in the room might know what these evidence-based practices are and already be using them, but others might never have heard them. And so we need to nurture them along the way. So that the data inquiry cycle that's mentioned there, that's a big thrust of the work this year, where we know in schools that are using data, it's sort of built into their process to decide like, what's the progress that we're making and how can we measure it? And how can we have that process be something that doesn't feel like some kind of punishment for people? It really isn't designed to be that. It's supposed to be something that is helpful, that they migrate to because they know it makes them better at their job, rather than something that's designed to make them feel badly about their work. So that's the work that's happening this year. We also do school visits. For example, I coach here at the high school, and one of our team will be assigned to come to school monthly and work on specifically what's happening at that school. What do they need? What does their team specifically need? We coach principals and leadership teams to help them nurture the process that they've decided at these monthly meetings to make sure that they're making the they want to be making, and do some differentiation. We make a distinction there. There's 2 words here that I think are interesting to differentiate between. The idea of mentoring and coaching, we think are 2 different things. Mentoring being the idea that I have as a professional, I've been through this process before, so I can perhaps be helpful in mentoring leaders through it because I've done it before and they have not. Coaching is a little bit different. We think coaching is more, it's resting in the idea of about coaching a principal. What do they want to get better at? What are the things that are concerning them about their job? And we work in a coaching process to help them set goals and then check in on those goals, work together, those as they go through. So talked a lot here, and I wonder, is there questions about this slide before I start moving forward?
With PD.
Oh, professional development. So sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yeah.
Jason, Terry,
Yeah.
do you do, staff seminars also, or do you just talk to the kids? How does that work?
We typically, we're not in front of, I would never be in front of students. Our work is generally with leaders. There are times when we go in front of staff, like for example, I came here to the high school at one point, was in front of a large group of people and including multiple people from all schools. But what we try to do is we think of it as we're working ourselves out of a job, right? We're trying to get it so we're helping people to gain some leadership skill. So if they needed us to do something in front of their staff, we would, but we want to do that less and less because our goal is that we would be receding and then eventually moving out, and all the processes that we've talked to them about would then be in place and they would be doing it. So it's a really good question. The sessions that we do, these monthly sessions, typically involves us helping them to see a process that we might lead that group in, that the leadership team group in. And we'll treat it as if we're in your school and this is a staff. And they get to participate in it with us leading it, with the notion of you're then going to be us back at your school. So then they get to play it around. Well, if we did it at our school, how do we change what Brett and Lisa did and how we make it fit our school? So that they would then take it and go back to their school. Now, does that answer your question? Yeah. Please.
Brett, making it real for a minute, there's an instructional leadership team at each of our buildings,
Mhm.
is there not? So Saxton's River,
That's right.
Athens Graphic,
Correct.
like that.
Yeah.
And they're usually 5 to 7 people, maybe? In
Yeah.
that range?
Yeah, that's right there. We would suggest it be somewhere in there. Larger the school, larger the number, but we don't like to get any more than say 8 or 10 would be
Right.
too big.
And is there one for the SU? Do you?
Yeah, we have a district leadership where we bring all those people together and our central office staff does meet in that kind of a team oriented thing. Yes.
That each instructional leadership team in each building has a plan and
That's
you
right.
help them with that.
That's right.
Okay,
And typically, in terms of the way we suggest instructional leadership teams at schools would operate, they would often, one of the questions that comes up is, well, in addition to say this meeting that happens once a month with us, we think it's a really good idea that they have 2 other meetings per month, at least 1 hour. Right, so say every other week back at the school, and that's the rhythm that the schools in your SU are under. And that's a place where they're continuing the work that we've done from this monthly plan, but they're also addressing things that they have coming up. For example, I was in a Zoom meeting earlier today with one of the principals from your SU, and they were talking about, well, they have a PD, professional development, next week. And they're going to be doing some work around how their best practices are working. So we're partnering with them as they're planning that, as we would with the other schools as they're planning their professional development as well. Yeah. Yeah. So
What are your smallest teams? Because I'm thinking of a couple of our schools that have really small staffs.
yeah.
Like
So-
Grafton and.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Saxon's River.
Yep. So the Grafton team is 4. I think both of the schools is 4 folks. The way we think about the membership of the instructional leadership team is there's a couple of things that we think are real sort of deal breakers that if you're going to do it, you should have to do this. And one is principal has to be on the team. We know it won't work if principals are there, not that they couldn't be absent or something, but if they're not a regular member of the team. Second thing is we say it has to have teacher presence. Right, so if we've been in districts before, we say, well, it's just the principal and assistant principal, we would say that's not an instructional leadership team, because it has to have teacher fingerprints on it. That's really important. After that, the numbers, size, we can do a lot of work with different numbers and size based upon the different schools, but yeah, to your point, I think that's really good. Smaller schools can have smaller ones. Yeah.
How are the teachers chosen for the leadership team?
So there's a process that we suggest that usually folks follow. And that is to start by helping the school to know, first of all, what is this thing? Giving people some information on, hey, we're starting this idea of an instructional leadership team. And we give them some information about what it is and what it is not. And we suggest that you, in a staff meeting, teach people about what it is. Then open it and say, anybody who's interested, let us know, right? it usually, what happens in schools a lot, as probably in any organization, there's lots of people who are sort of either they naturally migrate to leadership positions, they're very interested in being a leader, they like being in the know on things that are coming up, they're big picture thinkers. Those people usually go, oh, I want to do that, right? And that's great, because those people are good at it. But then there's also, sometimes we encourage principals to think, let's say there's somebody who you think would be really good at it, and perhaps they didn't raise their hand. You might go to them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because we think you'd be really good at it. They might say no, but at the very least, you told them, we see you as a leader here, and sometimes that's good for people to hear. So we would suggest that you would consider an open process, but also sort of manage it if you think there's somebody who has a real talent for it to be there. The challenge, of course, is people are so busy in their lives. Oftentimes teachers have small children and they need after school to get them to places, and they have, those challenges. So that's one of the things that comes into play, but yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say that there's students on it?
Not typically in this, sometimes we see schools that will invite students to a meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, but typically there isn't a student like on the team, but there could be necessarily, especially depending upon the age. But yeah. Please.
You mentioned measuring progress.
Yeah.
How do you measure?
Okay, there's a bunch of that's a really good question. There's a bunch of good ways to think about that. I'm going to use an example of, say, for example, in professional.
How are we doing?
Yeah. I'll mention that. Yeah. So if we're thinking about measuring progress toward the targeted learning focus, we would use what we call a SMARTY goal. So part of the process of defining a SMARTY goal is saying, how are we going to measure this? So we ask the school to consider it. And I'll just tell you a typical process. If a school, an elementary school is talking about coming to a targeted learning focus, it is often that they'll come to something. Remember, the question is, if there's one thing that our kids are going to get really good at, all things get better. Typically, schools come to something around literacy. Isn't always that way, but especially elementary schools, because the premise of their thought is, if the kids can say read and write really well, math's going to get better, science is going to get better, social studies is going to get better, behavior on the playground is going to get better, listening comprehension is going to get better, so I know the rules are going to get better. So they then tend to set a goal around something. If they choose a learning focus, I'm going to use my school when I was principal. Ours was reading comprehension. We measure progress through the measures that we use in our district around reading comprehension. So there's often several measures that apply that everybody's aware of that they already have. We don't encourage people to get new measures. You have enough already. No school has ever said, oh, we need more assessments. They always say, we've got plenty. So we would identify in that process what your school is saying those measures are. So in answer to your question, at each of the schools, as they come to their target learning focus, they then choose what's the stuff that we're going to measure this with. Both, we always say it's good to the summative measures that are thrust upon us, whether we like them or not, typically by, say, the state or the federal government. We have to use those because we don't have a choice. But then we do have some choice around what are the interim measures, the ones that we do along the way that we're going to do. And our favorite in terms of measuring is what we would refer to as formative measures. And that's like the idea of student work that's in front of kids every day, because we have the most control over that. And it's done by us for us. So those are typically where we would, use measures to talk about. Yeah. Those are great questions. Thank you. So I just want to draw your attention to this particular, Andy referenced this. I know you've seen this, but this is sort of a one-page document from your work as the recovery team that did the work, and then the administrative team after that encapsulates what we're your thoughts about, what is this district doing in our strategic action plan? And all the work that we're doing is focused schools and supporting your schools is designed to try and make all of this come to fruition. So it's not just a poster that sits on a wall, it's actually happening as you're doing it, and we're measuring along the way. So, for example, in this document, there are 3 clear goals here that your team came up with that say, this is how we're going to measure our progress. And the theory of action is also mentioned here very clearly, that we believe if we do this, then good things will happen for our kids. So these circles that you see around the outside, they are sort of the structure of what we're talking about, empowering teams and strengthening our leadership. And this is the statement that you folks have as sort of the way you're talking about what our schools are about. And all the work that we're doing is designed to support this, to make this actually happen. I wanted to put in here just some artifacts. These are just pictures that we take when we go around doing the work, because these are your schools, right? This is from your school. So we believe, like you see here, Central Elementary School, this is an example. They come to a target learning focus. We think it's really good that they have a target learning focus statement that's designed for teachers. It's got a lot of teacher language in it. It's kind of a little bit complicated if you're not a teacher. But then we say you ought to have like a kid-friendly version that parents could see, kids could see. It helps to make sure that it becomes real in the school, and we think it becomes visible. So this is a typical example. The target learning focus at Central Elementary School, the kid-friendly version says, read to know, write to show. So you can see their target learning focus is about getting kids to be able to read and then write about what they read. And this is, and speak to grow. And so these things are all what they're working on under their targeted learning focus, and gives them a chance to have a clear way of getting, for example, posters on the wall, or the way we answer the phone, or how it's at the bottom of the emails, so that it becomes real, it becomes visual, it becomes something that people know, oh, at our school, this is what we believe is really helping us. Other examples, so the idea of think it, speak it, write it. Think it, speak it, write it. These are examples of targeted learning focus, ways of thinking about that. And it gives us a visual that we say, this is what at Saxon's River, this is what we believe is our target learning focus. This next picture is actually the process itself. So this is at the middle school, and this is the middle school leadership team as they were going through this process. And you see the posters that are in front of them. That's from a meeting where they went through the whole staff, and they asked the staff to have these questions around what should our target learning focus should be, and what should the conditions be around it. And they collected all that, all the staff. Remember, we said lots of fingerprints on it, with lots of teachers. Now, a small group of people, in this case, the instructional leadership team at the middle school, is distilling it down and getting it to a place where, okay, we listened, we heard you, and this is what we now move into, right? And so this is just an example of what they were looking at. I thought it might be helpful for you to see. This is what they were had in front of them. So it's a process that we think is kind of like, I've heard people say it's almost like you watch a tennis match. The instructional leadership team has it, then it goes over to the next full staff, then it comes back to the instructional leadership team and back to the full staff, because we want people to have chances to weigh in, say what they see, help the leaders make decisions. What we also know is we're never going to come to full 100% agreement on anything. But what we want to do is make sure that 100% of people say, I was listened to. I was listened to. We heard. We have leaders, we have a representative group, we're going to make decisions, but those leaders are going to always be listening and hearing. So this framework, I'll just touch on it briefly, but these are 9 things we refer to as focus frameworks, because we believe leading a school with a framework is really important, because it anchors us and gets us away from feeling like every day is kind of crazy and things are just flying at us all the time. So the 9 things you see here, there's nothing revelatory in any of them. There are things that are going on in schools all the time. But what we do believe is very different is when we get a small group of people, in this case, the ILT, instructional leadership team, who steps out of the work on a regular basis to work on the work. That structure is so important in schools because everybody is so busy all the time. So we have to intentionally make room in the monthly schedule for a group of leaders to be working on these things to make sure that they're intentionally applied at the time it makes most sense at the school. So when I give you an example of what we already have talked about here today, this focus framework 5 says commit to a targeted learning focus that is understood and embraced by all. Well, we've talked a little bit about that tonight, right? That's one of the things that we think is really important in the leadership framework. And these other things that are mentioned here are all part of this. But the key for us is that this is not left to chance. This is something that is worked on consistently and nurtured by this group of leaders, and the full staff is aware. Otherwise, sometimes being in school just feels like you're just coming in and the next crazy thing's coming at you, and all you're doing is responding all the time, rather than being able to organize yourself so that you have a plan and it all feels like it's more in your control. So any questions about anything? Just want to, yeah, please.
Where's the high school's slogan?
Oh, target learning focus at the high school? Yeah. Yes, it's a really good question. So the target, the high school is typically in high schools, it takes a little bit longer. And as you know, there's been a leadership transition there that also added to the delay they had. The last meeting I was at the high school, they have now identified using the Vermont transferable skills. You're familiar with the state of Vermont, the transferable skills. They're talking about the target learning focus being some relationship between the idea of communication and personal responsibility. And in listening to the high school team, they feel like that idea of personal responsibility is so critical because of how much the kids might have lost in the time of, not being in school. So they want to marry those two things. So they're working on it. They're actually in the last final stages of making that process be formalized, but I think it's
a little bit behind.
yeah, it did set them back. It did. But it's also, I want to be careful because high schools always go slower, always. I don't know why that is. I've been doing this a long time, 13 years. I know when I go in a district, elementary schools are gonna go fastest. Middle will be next and high schools will be last. I don't know why, but it always works out that way. Yes, yeah, that's where they are. Please.
Also, this is what the principals presented to us on at the opening year meeting. They all told us their focuses.
Could you raise your voice a little bit?
Yeah, I was saying, this is what the principals presented to us on in the opening meeting of the
Yeah.
school year. They told us their focuses, and I think Kelly explained why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The high school was a little.
Yeah, and I applaud the last meeting I was at actually last week with the team. The high school team has really done a good job of trying to make sure that, with leadership transitions, it's obviously there are things that happen with delays, but they really sort of dive right back in and they're really working at it. So you have a lot to be proud of there, in my opinion. So other questions? Yeah.
The number 7, the construct a targeted improvement and professional development plan.
Yeah.
Where are we on that?
Yeah, so each of the schools, to me, what they're doing is they're trying to, the targeted professional development plan involves 4 behaviors that we think are really important for professional development to be effective. So those 4 behaviors are the idea of building expertise, right? So choosing what we're going to build expertise upon, then making sure that we're monitoring a change in practice, which for me, to be honest, as a principal, I never even thought of that. I thought, well, if we did professional development on something, we're done. What I learned was, it's not the way it works. We have to actually have a plan to nurture it, because if 25 people come to a meeting and we do some building of expertise, that's going to mean 25 different responses when we go back. So we have to really nurture some agreements around what that's going to look like, what we're committing to try, how we're going to come back. The third thing that we think about is measuring the impact of professional development by measuring student learning results. Because of course, the notion is if the teachers get better at something, it will result in student learning. So one of the things in their plan that they're doing is they're saying, well, what will we see in the improvement in learning as a result of this professional development? So using the example of my school, if we're working on reading comprehension and some technique in reading comprehension, we should see it as measured this way in student learning. And then the last one, which is often forgotten, is relentless communication. So we're communicating around professional development all the time, building a narrative in the school, because we know if we don't do that, people are so busy, it slips off their radar. So it's almost like the professional development plan needs a narrative story to be told along. Remember, we started here, then we went here, then we went here. Yes, Ian.
Just to add in, one of the things we intentionally did this year around professional development was using what schools are focused on as part of their targeted learning focuses, is we've structured our professional development throughout the year. So each one of those full day PDs is broken into 3 segments, and the first strand is all year. So a teacher who is maybe they're focused on reading, and I think Deb Cardin has spoken to a lot of you about the Lead to Read program that we're involved in. They're in that strand all year long. So that's a continual piece that they're doing. The second part of that is around allowing team time for teams to get together to talk about data and things of that nature that they're doing. And then the last couple hours is a choice time where teachers have a little bit more choice of choosing an area that maybe is part of their personal goal. On top of that is all the work administratively we're doing with walkthroughs and formal observations. And then layered into that, we're doing learning walks. We're starting to do learning walks where central office folks are walking with principals and walking with coaches, and they're literally going through classrooms and doing learning walks together. And then the goal there is to move forward where teachers would then continue on walking and going and observing their own peers. So it's a non-evaluatory process, but we're beginning that process this year, and the hopes is that you build capacity. So then you got third grade teachers maybe going and walking around and looking at other classrooms of third grade and seeing that best practice. It's some of the best PD we could do. So it's all building on a lot of this work that we've been doing.
Also think, to Andy's point, when this is going really well, it starts to shift from traditionally people feeling like when someone visits my classroom, it is a potentially negative experience for me because of its evaluative nature. What we want to do is shift it to where, no, actually, this is the instructional leadership team gaining information about their work. So in what supports do you need that we haven't put into place for you to reach this success metric that we've all decided upon in our last meeting?
Well, and I think it can also be what can we learn from you that then we can share with the broader community,
100%.
because there's experts in every classroom.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing we're guilty of in education, that is a place for us all to learn is the idea of celebrating progress. Because we're so busy and we're all problem solvers, right? To me, it's like we're surgeons or auto mechanics. We look for problems and we solve it. We look for problems and we solve it. We look for problems and we solve it, which is good. We need to do that. But it doesn't leave a lot of room for saying, oh, let's stop for a minute. Let's see the progress. This is good progress. And we know in collective groups that's important, for individuals that's important, and even for the leaders themselves to say, hey, we made some progress here. Yeah, please.
Yeah, in my vernacular, it's appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And I think it's an opportunity for us to sort of shift how we do these processes so people start to feel like, yeah, this is really helpful for me. And it didn't have any of the negative thoughts that I might have previously thought it had. What we know is until people feel it, they won't believe it. But once they have it happen, then they say, oh yeah, farewell. Yeah. Thanks for that. Those are helpful questions. So I'm just gonna mention this slide for a little bit because sometimes people like to say, well, where's all this going? And what's the timeline here? This is just a sort of a timeline for this year about where we were and where we're gonna go. And each time we get together in the session, the little arrow you see here makes its way across till we get here. And so for the big picture thinkers, people who want to know, like, where's all this going? We try to help them to see this is where it's going. So by the end of this year, we're looking for fidelity of implementation with our targeted learning focus and our evidence-based practices, our professional development data inquiry cycle, and looking at LASW being looking at student work. So these things will be processes that we will look for providing us fidelity. If I had one wish for every school that I've ever been in my life, either as a visitor or as a teacher, assistant principal, or principal, is that we would have an ability to know what our school needs to come to fidelity on anything. And we would define fidelity as 80% or more people are doing this process as we've described it. And in my own school, what I thought was, geez, if I send an email to everybody and say, hey, we're all gonna do it this way, we're all set. What I learned is, no, that's not how it works. It does not work that way. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of support, a lot of people working together to come to fidelity on anything. Something as simple as what's the noise level in the hallway? Or how do we get kids to pick up a tray at lunchtime? That stuff sounds simple. It's not. We have to work at it. We have to teach it. We have to nurture it. We have to do all that. But when schools, like effective classrooms, like we've all been in really effective classrooms, teachers don't leave that stuff to chance. They teach the kids, they nurture it, they take time to do it because they know in the end, the time they give to that at the beginning will save them lots of instructional time in the end. And the same thing is true about instructional leadership teams. If we think about nurturing fidelity in our staff, it's worth our time. Because let's say I could wave that magic wand that I just mentioned, and the school did have an ability to do that. Think of how much learning progress we could make. If we're all adopting a way to teach reading and we could just get folks to fidelity around it, it's really good work. That's kind of where all of this is moving. We're nurturing this idea of fidelity of implementation through using these things to get there. And the journey at each school is different. And so we know that. We know there are some things that are the same, sort of tier one things, but there's lots of things that are different at each place we work. So I just put these things in here because they're just examples of some of the tools that we put in front of the group, and I just want to share them with you. So one of the things we try to do is give people things that they can use back with their staff. So like a description, we say a target learning focus. What do we mean by that? This bulleted slide sometimes helps people because it helps them to think about what that actually means. And they could use that with their staff. This is another example of when we say a small set of evidence-based practices. What do we mean by that? And these bullets here kind of are an explanation to help us understand what that actually means. These tools, we believe, our job is to try and make the leader's job easier, not harder. So we want to take things off their plate anytime we can, if we could help them. So sometimes helping them to have when they leave our meeting, we give them a meeting plan that they could actually just use, that we just practice in front of you. Or they can adjust it if they wanted to, or change or do something different. But we want to say, if you want to, you could just use this meeting plan that we just demonstrated for you. And here's some tools to use it, and these are examples of the tools. This is you talked about the targeted performance plan. This is an example of what we mean by that. Gives us the idea of creating alignment, changing practice driven by data. So the idea of professional development becomes like a living, breathing cycle rather than just a one-time thing. It's something that's revisited and checked in upon to make sure that we're studying it and seeing that the impact is through things like, as Andy mentioned, learning walks. Is it actually happening that we designed? There are a couple other tools here that you could look at your leisure if you wanted to. This is something that helped me so much as a principal, so I love these things, but we reference these as quality indicators. So you see, for example, in this one, the target learning focus. These documents are designed to give schools to say, well, if we had a target learning focus in a school, there's 10 statements here in this document that tell us this is what it would look like by the end of the year. So it's almost like if I'm a fourth grade teacher and I want to have curricular standards from the state of Vermont to tell me this is what a fourth grade student should have and know and be able to do by the end of the year. Sometimes those things are helpful for people because I might, with the best of intentions, want to get there, but I don't know what it looks like. These documents, what we call quality indicators, are helping them to say, where are we? We ask them in the meetings to go through at certain times and think about their progress with these documents. How are you doing? And we use the red, yellow, green idea. Green meaning, yes, we're there, we've got it. Yellow meaning, we've done some work, but it's not there yet. Red meaning, we just haven't done anything with it yet. And we ask them to nurture them toward, we have a little time plan to nurture them toward green because we feel the evidence suggests to us over the last 23 years, if they get to these places, they're going to see significant improvement. So I put those in there just because I thought if you wanted to look at them, you could, because you could see what's going on in your schools to whatever degree you have an appetite for. And this, to me, helps to understand some of the work of this year. This is the data inquiry cycle that your schools are learning about and how to use. In our last meeting, just last week, we asked them to, one of the commits to try for the meeting was to think of a team that if they aren't already, that they're going to practice this cycle with. Could be with their own ILT, could be with a grade level team, if that team is, ready for it. Could be with your whole staff if you wanted to. But we wanted to help them to think about using this cycle to look at some data to move them forward. The cycle is a circle for a reason, because it's never over. It's not linear, it doesn't stop, it just keeps going back, right? So I'm going to use something simple. If, let's say, at my school, we've noticed that not every kid who is read in reading, so behind grade level 2 or more grades in our vernacular, has a chronic attendance problem. But we have noticed every single kid who has a chronic attendance problem is read in reading. So we noticed that and we said, oh my God, there's no way a kid, who is chronically absent and missing the valuable instruction of these teachers every day is getting to where we need them to be in reading, our target learning focus. So we did something this cycle right here, say, okay, we need to analyze this because we've got to figure out what are we doing about this problem. It's a large enough problem. We need to do something about it. That's just one example of lots of examples. But it's a way for us to make sure that the data isn't just a number sitting somewhere. It's actually something doing something about. We have a plan, we have some next steps, we're going to nurture this, we're going to check in on it, and we have a way of measuring, to your point, how do we do? Are we getting there? Are we getting the kids who are behind into the classrooms where they need to be? What's the issue? Is it that, the kid isn't showing up to the bus stop? Is it that the bus stop moved and the kid didn't know? Is it, what is it? We don't know, but we're going to work on that. So this is just a simple visual to show that process. Obviously, the process is a little more complicated than that, but it's a visual. These are the 4 things that I mentioned that are targeted for a professional development plan that are the cornerstone of that sometimes are where we turn when we get here. If we're doing something on instruction, we might say the way we monitor and adjust over in this area over here is by going in our professional development plan. If we've learned, using that readings example, that our kids are able to decode and make sounds, But when they're asked to then translate that into meaning, they struggle. Well, we might say, this is an opportunity for us where we can build some capacity with our teachers to address that issue through our professional development plan as part of our daily inquiry study. Because we're thinking, my gosh, what we're finding is when our kids are asked to decode, we're hitting home runs. I'm using my own school as an example because this is true for us. But that's what we learned. We were really good at getting kids to be able to identify letter sounds and decode and those kind of things. But when they were asked to actually read and make meaning from that sentence, that's where their roadblocks started. The data help us there. So any questions on that? That's a lot of the work this year, actually, that we're doing in school. Okay, so my contact information is there. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to talk to you folks who are dedicated to the lives of kids. And I know, you're giving up nights of your life to do that. And so appreciative of that in my career, people who would be willing to do that. But I would like to open for any questions that you have in regard to that.
I just want to say, I really like the focus of what the focus of your focus school thing, but I just like the fact that teachers have so much say in this. I think that leads to like collective efficacy, and I think that will be really helpful in getting teachers all on the same page and working forward. I think often in years past, like in the district, it's been very top down, and that does not work. And so I just appreciate the focus you have on making sure the leadership is distributed and everyone has a say in what they're doing.
Thank you for mentioning that. We think it's so critical. We also think that those different lenses help us. I can tell you every single day I ever drove to work as a principal, my intention was to do good work. And I was really going to try. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see through the eyes of the cook manager, through the custodian, through the third grade teacher, through a paraprofessional. I don't have those eyes. So they literally I need those perspectives to be able to have the decision-making power. So those kind of things we think are so critical to leadership teams because we want lots of eyes looking at these problems and lots of voices to help us. And then, of course, we have a small group of leaders to make decisions, but we need those perspectives. And obviously, teachers are doing this important work every day. Yeah.
Brett, we've got a question or a comment from Chris Kibbe.
Yeah, please.
Chris?
Yeah.
Hi there. It's kind of a two-part question with more emphasis on the second part. You've worked in the district some years now. I'm wondering what you're seeing as some of the barriers to student learning improving. But more importantly, what can school board members do to support or encourage some improvement in student achievement?
Yeah, so to me, two questions. Yes, two questions there. I heard you say. One is, in general, what do I see the patterns and trends in terms of the barriers that are in front of your district? And the second one, what can the school board do to be supportive? So really good questions. Thank you for that. The first one to me, the patterns and trends that I see in your district that I think are really important for us to consider as a leadership group, this being a leadership group, is that without attaching, lots of reasons behind it that I would be unaware of, I could guess, but be unaware of, is that where we are currently in your district and in other districts very similarly, is that kids are not at a large enough group of kids are not at the levels that the grade level would prescribe them to be in measurable learning outcomes. I'm going to use examples like if we have a clarity from the state of Vermont around what grade level proficiency looks like in reading at a grade level, the typical grade level that we would look at, we don't have what we would consider the proficiency that is acceptable. And so drawing lines as to what we believe is acceptable is one of the things we have to do. We have to decide what is that? What do we believe it should be? And then secondly, where are we and how are we going to close that gap? So using the example of reading, because it's a simple one at the elementary level, if we say, we believe, and in your goals, that one of your goals in your strategic action plan says 100% of students are going to be reading at grade level. It's very bold. It's a very bold statement, and I applaud you for saying it. But there's a cap, right? We're not there. And so as long as we're not there, that all means all says we got some work to do. My suggestion would be that the work that you're doing around coming to agreements around what is the cohesive way we're gonna think about the literacy block in the elementaries, schools is really good work. It's really hard work, it's really long-term work, and I'm watching it happen in your schools, and I think it's terrific. Because coming to those agreements, we believe that there should be a shift in the way we think about leadership in American schools, where formerly we were considered sort of the sheriff of the rules. And we think that that's an unsuccessful model. We believe the leadership in schools, that includes superintendents, school committees, principals, anybody who's in a leadership position, we should consider ourselves the guardian of the agreements. We're not here to punish folks for not getting there. What we're here to do is guard the agreements that we've cultivated. So we have to cultivate those agreements first, which is like the work that Deb Cardane and others are doing across the district around what does really good literacy instruction look like and how do we support people with that. And then we guard those agreements relentlessly to say, we've said things like our literacy block is going to look like this. How's it going? What are the barriers for you? What are the things getting in your way? How can we move those out of your way? Which sort of bridges to your second question, Chris, which to me, that's what really good school board, school committee leadership looks like, is there's an expression that I heard long ago, a person who I had such respect for who did this work, who said, in really good organizations, never mind schools and school districts, the problems roll uphill and the support rolls downhill. Because of course, downhill is where the children are, right? So those of us who happen to be in these positions where we're the top of the hill, and we then have to be asking, what are the supports that you need? What are the barriers that are in your way? How can we be helpful? It doesn't mean we always have the answers, but those questions are repeatedly what we're asking, because when we do, to me, what happens is it shifts the way people think about you. It shifts the way they think about the school committee from maybe this scary thing that I have to come in front of to, no, those people are in our corner. They're the people who are really supporting us. And when it gets like that, to me, there's real opportunity. So I don't know if that answers your question. You had to follow up with that. So.
Well, let's start.
That's good.
If I could add one thing to that, I would love at some point, if there was ever an opportunity, and happy to be helpful if this was helpful, is that data inquiry site we're talking about, we could actually do one here. You know, it would be, to me, it's really good because you get to see, you know, that in action, but you also you base your thinking in the data. And so sometimes what we've helped is school boards to actually have a data inquiry meeting as part of your meeting, where you're using that cycle to help you to make some decisions. So
Explain a little bit more about what it would look like.
yeah. So for example, there are some things that we would consider sort of school-based data or grade-based data, but then there's some things that we would consider, this is a SU data, right? This is across the whole SU. And this is something that perhaps has been persistent for us. It was prior to the pandemic, it was during the pandemic, and it still is an issue for us. So I'm going to use something that may be simple, it may be simplified, but if there was an issue where there's inconsistent, there's persistent chronic attendance problems at some of our schools, and we as a district decide that's really important for us, that we want to do that. And we think it's a large enough issue that it's a school board issue, that we're going to think about how are we shifting resources to make sure that we're getting 95% of our kids every day in those schools. Because the premise is the only place that they can get that expert instruction in their lives is the short 12-year window that we have. And it is so unlikely that they will get any of that expert instruction as soon as they leave. So we've got to be urgent about getting them there 180 days a year, as many of those 180 days we can over those 12 years. So that might be a data inquiry cycle that we might use several data sets to then, as a team, go through, and with presence of people, say, for example, like if there's someone who is in charge of transportation, someone who's in charge of finance, someone who, the people who have a sort of stake in that might be here with us, and we might look at data like that. I just use that as an example. It could be many things. I don't know if that helps. Is that
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Any other comments or questions for Brett?
Sure. I don't know if it's a comment or question, but it's more directed to Andy. It would seem to me, this all sounds very good. It seems to me that the instructional leadership team that we've formed in each school is critical to the success of this project for each school.
100%.
Okay. And so one of the questions I have for Andy, not necessarily to answer tonight or for future reference, is how good are the leadership teams in our schools? Okay, because as I say, you know, you've got to have people buy into this thing if it's gonna help our kids. And you know, you know, some schools are more eager, whatever. Yeah, but, and of course, you're at different levels of experience and principles and stuff like that. So you have those kind of factors that hit you. But I'd like to hear from Andy at some time later, particularly with regards to Rocky.
So very briefly, I think one of the things we intentionally said was we wanted principals to not just pick the same people they always pick. Right, because if you pick a lot of yes people, and just to be very blunt, right? If I pick all the people who support everything I want to do, then we're only going to go the direction I want. And so we purposely said to principals, please have a diverse group. As Brett said, there might be that person you reach out to who doesn't always step up, or maybe who has a different view than you do, because that's going to affect the change and make us drive. It's going, you know, I always say you got to break some eggs to get an omelet, right? Like we have to have uncomfortable times to make ourselves better. And so I think we did a good job of building our teams. The question of how effective are they? This is what I think you're asking, and how will they drive us in the future? I think we're still measuring that, but I can get.
Do the leadership teams change every year?
What I would say is that's dependent upon the school. Typically there is, you know, there's a chance that, let's say, you know, somebody retires or somebody moves to Nebraska, or, you know, those things happen. But oftentimes there is a pretty consistent membership. There are times when people will say, hey, listen, I gave a lot of time last year, and so this year I can't do it. And it's an opportunity to add folks. The one thing I just wanted to mention in terms of, this may go back to Chris's question as well. Sometimes what I've seen school committees do is, if you're interested in this question about what's the current health of the leadership team, is if you were to say, invite one leadership team per meeting per month, and they would just come and, you know, say, what are we working on, right? And you would get a chance to learn from them. I think that's really helpful. I also think that one of the ways, were I in your seat, if I was to measure what's the health of this team, it goes back to what Andy was saying. I think the healthiest teams I've ever been a part of, they have really hard conversations. The degree to which the conversations sometimes are resting in really difficult places, that's good news to me. I always believe when adults are having really difficult conversations and professional discourse, kids benefit. And so if you did invite teams, that might be a question I'd ask is, what's the challenge? What's the shark closest to your boat right now? What's the thing that's causing your team to really struggle? Because they're going to present to you lots of things. And to me, presenting that is sometimes where, you know, like a formative assessment of how they're doing, is what I would suggest. Yeah. So I think it's really a good question.
I will say, I think our teams have been fairly consistent from last year to this year.
Yeah.
There's been, like you say, an individual here or there, but they've been consistent, which I think is.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical, especially in a district this size. You know, it would probably mirror the degree to which you have turnover of staff, right? And to me, in your district, you don't have a lot in comparison to other places, right? You have, you know, less turnover in most places, and that I work in. So yeah, I would say probably mirrors that.
Chris, were you trying to say something else?
No, I like that idea of inviting the leadership teams to talk to the school board and really kind of getting down to what are the difficult questions.
Yeah, that's where the good stuff lies. It's like the family reunion, stuff gets real, right?
Like Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, we got that coming up, don't we? I'm sure it's gonna be all harmony and hugs, right? Yeah.
So with all of that, and unless you've got anything more you want to add to,
No,
we know that you're not far away. We thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here
please,
doing.
yeah, but anytime I'd be happy to help, and just want to say how much I appreciate this privilege of being with you all.
Well,
Thank
we
you.
appreciate
Thank
it. Thank you.
Very nice job.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Mm. I would just reinforce again that this is the third year and you can begin to see and feel the accumulation of real shared knowledge and leadership and ownership at the local level. Thank you again,
Thank you.
Brett.
Bye-bye. It's,
So with that, we're going to move right into the superintendent's report.
yeah, so I'm gonna, because that was, and I appreciate it, but I also want to be cognizant of time. I just want to point out, one of the big pieces in my report, last week, central office leadership team, started a principal supervisor academy, and it dovetails in with all of this work. So as much as what we're doing at different levels, the principal supervisor is about central office folks, how they can support principals so that they can continue to keep doing this work. And we talk about through that, a through line. So the direct line to the student, because we don't get to work with students every day. That's probably the worst part of being in central office. We don't get to work with students every day. And so to ensure the work that we're doing has that through line all the way down to students. We started 2 years ago working with the University of Washington with instructional leadership teams or instructional leadership with all of our principals on how we're doing observations and what we're doing as we look for different good teaching and instruction. And so this is a continuation of it, and this is the coaching part. So the principal supervisor piece allows our central office folks to coach our principals. And so part of it at this beginning stage is there's 4 of us. Each one of us are supposed to work with one of our principals around, just as Brett was talking about, like picking a kernel, right? We can't do everything. We're not gonna be able to, but let's pick an area that we can work on data and go through a cycle, that inquiry cycle and work towards it and see and be able to measure how it affects our students. So it all dovetails together of what we're doing. It's just another piece of it. And a lot of what Brett just talked about is a lot of the work we are working on. The other big piece, tomorrow we're going to be meeting with New Solutions K-12 and getting a preliminary report on their interviews and thoughts around scheduling and for the middle school and the high school. Again, it fits back in with what Brett was talking about. When we're looking at data and we're identifying different areas where students are struggling, how do we adjust our daily schedule to make sure that students are getting what they need? And if they need a double dip of something, if they need extra time, how are we making sure? So we don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, but we adjust to the students' needs. And then the last thing I just want to highlight is I started a superintendent's advisory council. And I will say I was a little ambitious. I thought we could have 3 different groups. We wanted to have a parent group, a teacher group, and a student group. And, I think for initial, it's hard to engage, engagement is something we're always working on with our families, and this was part of it. We combined our teacher and our parent group. We met last month, had a nice turnout. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shift, as opposed to asking students to come to us, I'm going to go to the student. So I'm starting to talk with principals of how we can set that up so that we have either lunch with the superintendent or we pull students, it might be like at Westminster, I spoke with a 6th grade teacher, maybe it's the whole class, maybe it's just a certain group of students. And we're going to be looking to do that so we can get that voice and hear back from all those different groups. And a lot of it, like I think even today earlier, in a group, we talked about, early releases and whatnot. And so we've got a survey out there. We just pushed it out to parents, trying to get some feedback on the early release we just did, on overall early release, but also on our, on the conferences that we just had. We're trying to get some feedback. So there's 2 surveys out there, trying to get some feedback from parents. So, but I can answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very exciting, Andy, to see you beginning to be able to get into the schools and do some of this directly at this point in time. It's
It's
healthy.
as I say, I mean, it's probably been, it's the biggest shift going to school office. You stop having that direct connection with kids and students and seeing the work. And I think that we've had a lot of lifts that we've had to do, and now being able to kind of see some of the progress and be able to get back into the classrooms and work with students and teachers. Well, that's why I got into education, so. I think Chris had a question.
Chris, I'm sorry. Yes, please. We see your hand up. Thank you. Chris Kibbe?
Somewhat related, but maybe not. I wondered if at some point in the next couple of months, we could have a report on teacher supervision and evaluation and how that's going this year, just the interim. I know it's not the end of the year, but we want to make sure that it's going on because it's important.
Sure.
Right, and you've really instituted some positive changes there. This is just a matter of your bringing that to the whole board.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
thank you, Chris,
We
for
can
the
bring a
question.
report, Chris. Thank you.
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
thanks.
Yeah, the other thing along that line was, I know, several years ago, when I was on this board, we went through a fairly extensive curriculum review. And it would seem as though that should happen periodically. I know in recent weeks, I've looked at, along with the high school board, with some of the curriculum issues at what I would say are issues at the high school, and I just think that somewhere curriculum review belongs here, and so I would just raise that as something for future discussion.
Actually related to that, because Jigs has raised some of this topic with me, and it's just a question, maybe it's for you, Jason, but at the high school, we have literally requirements for students to graduate. Who is it that provides the oversight to see whether or not the students are actually meeting those requirements? I'm literally asking.
Who provides the oversight?
Is it a counselor? I mean, is there? I'm asking.
Well, that is a good question. We did invite guidance to come for our next meeting, so maybe they can answer that and get back on that.
Okay.
I would like to actually ask Priscilla if she worked. How did that work?
Well, basically, the coursework is done and evaluated by the teacher, and the teacher's grades indicate whether the student has passed or failed. We had a recovery program that students could attend in the summertime if they weren't quite up to having satisfied all the requirements for that course, so that they could pass that course and earn those requirements. And it was based on, they had to have enough proficiency, because we're now basing all of our requirements on proficiency-based education. They had to have proficiency enough in the course to be able to satisfy all of the aspects of that course. And then the counselor checked their transcripts and made sure that they had the right credits to be able to graduate.
Carol?
Yeah.
If I can add to that. So Vermont has educational quality standards, and so that is the benchmark that every course is any curriculum that we design has to meet those standards.
Okay.
And so we start with those standards and we unpack those standards. Vermont is a proficiency-based graduation state. So you then back off of that. And so how how is a student able to meet proficiency? And be able to demonstrate that they've met the standard through proficiencies. Those then lead to credits for how a student could do it. And it comes down to administration, ensuring that the what the teachers are teaching is meeting those standards and the proficiencies that are in place, all the way down to, pre-K and kindergarten. So it's not just high school. And so then it's looking at those pieces. And I think COVID really, and I hate to keep using COVID, but it created this chasm, right? Because we started thinking about all these other problems, and we just had this conversation the other day with our central office leadership. We've got to get back to looking at a cycle of curriculum. And just this past summer, as far as social studies, we started working on a scope and sequence, right? So we've begun that process of, okay, what are we teaching? When are we teaching it? And that's going to help us to break it down, because when you even get into literature and English language arts, what you don't want to see, and I as Brett says, he uses his own school. I'll use my own son as an example. When I hear it, and he didn't come through he was in a different district, but he would talk about, like, I got to read this book, and he's in 10th grade. I read it in 8th grade. That's not good. We don't want kids, there might be a dive deeper, but why are you reading the same text and not doing different things, right? Like, so there might be a reason. So that's part of curriculum, is that scope and sequence piece. And so we're trying to get those alignments in, but then dig a little deeper into those things. So we are beginning that process, and trying to define it so that we could come to you and say, here is it. Yeah, every 5 years we're taking this course and reviewing it, or this program. Because I think that's really what we need to be doing, is when's the last time we looked at our different programs?
So as a question for you all, the idea that we might invite each of the instructional leadership teams to meet with us one at a time, that could provide a structure for us to get a little more depth. I'm asking your level of interest in that. I heard Chris kind of say affirmatively earlier. What do you think?
I think it would be great to be able to do that myself.
I mean, it could be either at this level, or it could be at each board level. So
I think it'd be interesting to do one of them at this level. I think the others may be better in the context of the local school board.
We'll give thought to that, and we'll.
No, I think it makes sense, because we're putting a lot of time,
a lot of
time and effort into
dollars.
this.
I'm not going to lie. I mean, there's dollars involved.
There's no
here,
buy-in, and you don't have. And the key is leadership. If you don't see leadership in these teams, then it'd be hard to get excited about it. At least for me, anyway.
I was disappointed to hear that. Did you say we've been doing this for 3 years?
No.
No.
So we've been working with focus schools. I want to clarify it, because that's a great question, Jason. We've been working with focus schools for 3 years. We started with them about our recovery plan that the state mandated.
Right, I remember.
That's right.
As we developed that recovery plan and solidified that, we then began the conversation of, okay, how can we ensure that this work that we put together, 100% of our kids are reading, right? We know we're not there. How do we get there? Instructional leadership teams, we felt were the right way to move, and we asked focus schools to continue on working with us. We began working last year on developing those instructional leadership teams at both the high school and the middle school. Because of administrative changes, we did struggle a little bit. One of the conversations I've had with Brett over the time is, help me understand, like, okay, I know the high school's behind, I know the middle school's a little bit behind. And, even before we jumped into it, he told me the high school and the middle school are going to be behind, because the structures of those buildings and the way instruction is done, it doesn't lead itself all the time to that collaborative, it's just more of a lift at times. And so, one of the things I was gonna say, even when Brett was here, and I just didn't get a chance to, is today, just before, our meeting, you know, I was here talking with, Ms. O'Ryan, and one of the members from the instructional leadership team came in and was like, it was almost like they had an aha moment, and it was like, I think we're there, and they were like excited about the talk that they were doing and how they were bringing that, you know, personal accountability and communication together, and they already have a plan for how they're going to implement it, and they're starting to have this conversation. So it's kind of like that snowball going down a hill, right? So it's gone slow, but it's picking up real fast, and I think we're going to see a lot of good work come out of our folks this year. So
Thank you,
That's
Frank. I feel better about our husband now.
So with that, let's move to the money.
Oh. What a lead in, right?
Right.
So you have your expenditure report. And I just want to say it's marked up. And what we're hoping for is to give you a copy soon that is not marked up. And again, I think this just, the markups just say where we're at. I want you to know that we've been doing a lot of audit prep stuff, and I think the auditors are thrilled, and they're hoping to have everything done at the end of this month. I have said that each board would meet with them and at a certain time, because I just think to finish up where we are and get again on the right track for audits, I want you to have questions and have those answers of where you are, where, you know, what the audit report gives you. There's a lot there, and I just want to make sure you feel comfortable with the information that they're furnishing. And again, I will say, if you went to 22, you know, for me, 22, the bottom line is okay. Anything in between, you know. So I do want to say, last week, I received a call from the Vermont Department of Labor. And the gentleman said, geez, we've sent you some invoices for unemployment. This deals with a COVID time, you know, probably from 2020 to up through 2023. And I was amazed that we got it, but it ended up being 141,000 for the SU. And so we certainly want to make sure that we're paying this, and we have asked the auditor to give us some assistance, because as you may or may not know, the Vermont Department of Labor had a tremendous amount of problems and issues trying to figure out what the heck was the unemployment that was due for most employers. And the reason I say that is keeping in mind, when somebody goes out on unemployment, they look back 3 years of where the person worked, and you're charged based on that amount of work. So when we get charged by the department, we want to know who it is, what we're being charged for, so we can kind of do some analysis, making sure that we're comfortable. So because of the fee schedule and interest, we felt it was important to get them paid. And my conversation with the gentleman was, yes, you better get it sent in, you better make it overnight. So I apologize, because I want to say, anytime we send out any check of any size at any time, we've got to get board approval. And I guess I got blindsided because I didn't necessarily do that, but I promise it will never happen again. So
we underpaid the unemployment by 141,000, or we didn't pay any unemployment?
we didn't pay any that I'm aware of. And some of it,
Right.
I think some of it is because they don't necessarily have the data to say, hey, this is for Johnny Smith.
Cause that's
Well,
pretty
that-
cheap.
That's what you need.
I mean,
Yes,
They need to provide you that data.
yeah,
yes. So anyways,
pretty cheap for not having paid any,
well,
cause it's based on salaries.
It's just the SU.
yep, there were a couple of
Oh.
other entities,
So I just
small,
wanna,
but-
yeah, but
Okay,
So
We've
there
got
are 141, they called, they said. You owe money, you need to send it, we didn't like check.
No, I sent it because I want to make sure that we stop any interest accruing. Now, that doesn't negate me going back and saying, hey, I want 45,000 of that back.
You're gonna try to get that back from the state?
You know what? That's the court system's certainly available.
Oh, boy.
But we'll do what we have to.
I remember from prior board service, periodically you get this request from the state. It would list the employee who formerly worked for us. And it would document these months and how much was due based on whatever, okay? And somebody in the finance office would check it. And if it was okay, we pay it. If it wasn't okay, we question it. A lot of times we challenged it. So I think I think hopefully there'll be a back check to this.
Yes.
So that we actually review it.
Yep.
so do we pay quarterly unemployment normally? I mean, like most businesses?
Yes, but keep in mind, I haven't seen a thing since I've been here.
Okay.
there's some question, as I started to unpack this today, as I found out, there's some question of where these statements were sent. And could they have been sent to individual schools and then somehow they didn't get to us? That's what we're trying to unpack. Or what address they went to. As Jim says, it goes all the way back to COVID. Some of the reason for this has to do with the RIF of the 34 paras that happened. So you go all the way back to that time when that decision by this board at the time to do that RIF. Those people had the right to file for unemployment. There are times where some of our employees, because they don't work during the summer, they file for unemployment. And so there's an administrative work that has to go through, that check that you're talking about, like that has to happen. We don't get those statements. We never make those checks. And so you're accruing all this interest, which is why we said to Jim, let's just pay it and figure it out because you're paying too much. We're paying more money than we need to. If the amount of time we are going to need to spend to unpack this to really understand it. So, that was the biggest concern, was that we were going to end up paying interest and spending even more money. So.
Financial situation for this year. And I've kind of highlighted several areas, certainly special education. And I'm looking at page 3, which is in the bottom right corner. And you'll see I've got an arrow there for the special education. This is just. Priscilla, you got that?
Which page?
Page 3.
3.
Okay, so in roughly in the middle of the page, you'll see that the budget balance for special education is 315 in the whole. Now, when we think of that, special education and related services, meaning psych services, OT, PT, all of the rest of it, you know, there's quite a balance, a negative balance in there. So we're certainly going to have to look and move. Next phase is going to be to move where we've got extra money where there's some in teachers and paras, we're gonna move that to contracted services to kind of balance out as much as we can with what's here. And I just will say, in one area of finance, we hired an extra person because we didn't think we didn't, at the time, last year, we didn't know that we were gonna need another person in there because they're gonna have to start learning some other details for the business function. There's a software that was purchased, which is 20,000, which is Frontline, which is a payroll timesheet, which again, we're trying to integrate as well into the system to get you squared away. It's gonna be a tight year, a very tight year. And I did say to the auditor, I said, wow, I said, boy, we're gonna hang on. What funds in 23 that we may have as a balance, we may need those funds to balance out for this year. So we'll see how that goes. But
You have any good news?
well, I think the good news is at least we're recognizing those areas, trying to get it squared away.
So, can we have, as Brett would say, a tough conversation so we could grow? This assessment, like each board, each school has to pay for the SU.
Yeah.
You know how much of a drag this is on the high school board? And I can only speak for the high school board, the assessment, we're gonna be assessed. Now, the education that is going to be. The kids are gonna suffer at the end of the day. Because we have a responsibility to the taxpayers also. We're in a tough spot. And it seems like I haven't been here 100 years, I've been here 3. And it seems like every year, there's always that gotcha, like this or last year or the year, just like, when is that gonna stop?
Last year, the SU returned to the high school $500,000. And I mean, you know, it's good years sometimes not so good. And I guess what I'm saying to you is 23 probably is not gonna return $500,000. So, but I think we're gonna be able to balance out okay.
In your professional opinion, and I need this, because I gotta bring this back to the high school board. We have to create a budget that is razor tight. That's your opinion.
I think
No flaw.
we put together a budget that tries to cover all of the contingency stuff. And again, I will say to you, what was happening now with psych interventionists, you know, where you're shifting those now this year into the SU. Well, guess what? Guess where the SU is? In the hole.
Yeah.
And I mean, substitutes. That's going into the SU.
Yeah.
And I mean, we shuck stuff back and forth, and you say, where the heck are we?
Yeah. Is the substitutes improved? I don't want to get you off track. Does that number improve since last year?
I think that it's,
We're only in November.
Is it improved so
Everyone's
far?
getting sick.
I paid a lot last year. That's,
yeah, I don't think it's as much this year.
so the technology that we implemented is working.
Well, I mean, it's early on, but we'll see.
Maybe let's see.
I think one of the other things is like Jim was just saying, with the psych services, that got shifted this year into the SU. But there's still the monies in the locals. We didn't shift that money, so your local budget may save a little bit there. I mean, the monies keep moving. It's you're November and there's a lot of movement back and forth,
Right.
and so you know, but we're tracking and we're seeing, like with the special ed, with the contracted services, we know that we had to we couldn't fill teaching positions, we contracted. We know that there's money in the salary line, and now we're gonna actually shift that so that negative doesn't show as much of a negative. We're actually gonna move the money in a line item now, as opposed to just say, look, you're over here and under here. So there's gonna be some balancing happening.
But Jim, I just, as an old budget guy, once we set the budget, you can't transfer expenses. I mean, you can't do it.
We can. You can, in the school budgeting, you can transfer.
But that's a slippery slope. I
It
mean,
is.
It's,
It
it's
is.
one thing to compare actual to the budget. But if you're messing with the budget, if you're changing the budget as you go, I don't think, in order to try to bring balance, I mean, the bottom line is where it balances.
Yeah.
And I think the integrity of the process, I mean, when we budget, we look at the previous year's budget.
Right,
And
right.
if you're changing that budget all through the year,
The one thing, Jim, with budgeting that I have learned is that a budget is an estimate of your costs. There's a lot that can change in that year and a half that you're looking forward on. And it really is.
Yeah.
And you can't change what the voters have voted and approved for your budget. You can't change that bottom line. But I've always allowed movement. If somebody wants to spend more in books than they do in supplies, hey, that's the same money. And I don't mind somebody shifting that just because they want to have it as exact as possible. So
I don't agree.
Right,
do not
let's,
agree.
let's,
Yeah,
I want us to move into the proposed budget, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna
let's go.
say actually that I agree with, let me finish my thought, Chris, and then I'll go to you. Just that if any monies moved, we would want to see exactly where the spending was. I don't think, I'm
Yeah,
agreeing with
You
you.
agree, yeah.
That we don't want to have new budget lines that we didn't know about, that all of a sudden money was put in there, taken from another place. We actually want to see what happened.
Actual.
Yeah, on each line. And then the bottom line becomes fine, but we want to know where we overspent and where we underspent. Chris, your comment, please?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Mr. McAuliffe. We should not be shifting money from one budget item to another just to make somebody feel good about the fact that they're covered there. It all comes out in the wash, but we need to make budget decisions down the road, and we need to know what we actually spent, what we actually budgeted, and if you went over, fine. If you saved money here, good. But don't be shifting money around without the board's approval. That is my feeling on this.
okay,
Yeah.
we will lessen the journal entries.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement about that.
Can we expect that special ed's gonna continue to go over for the next few years? I mean, there is a lot of kids who are in the process of evaluation right now. And this funding model has changed. So is it something that should be expected that special ed will do?
My view, as a state of Vermont backs out of special education, you're picking up more costs.
Right,
And the short answer is yes.
so this is not gonna be an anomaly, this $315,000.
So-
If anything, it's gonna go
So
higher.
we are projected to get $350,000 less next year in the census block grant.
Mhm.
We already know that.
And we're gonna have many more students. in special education.
So, and we know that there's always gonna be a steady referral rate to special education. We're working on improving our regular ed teachers' ability to address some of those low, where some kids might have been referred, we're trying to avoid that, but there's always gonna be a steady stream. But we are seeing a market increase in the number of students being referred to special education. And at the same time, you see a decline in your membership, overall membership. right? So, and your census block grant is tied directly to your long-term membership. So as long-term membership goes down and you see special ed referrals rising, that gap will have to be filled by the local budget. That's the.
All right, Karen, a question. I'd like us to move into the projections for where we are with budget planning. But do you have more to report on?
I just want to have a couple of items that I guess they relate a little bit to budget, but as with
I'll come back to you, Karen.
as with five
Initiative.
districts, sometimes we get siloed. And this gives you an opportunity to look at. Just in total, district in total. And say data is always interesting. And I try to look at, the fourth dimension for looking at stuff.
Thank you.
This gives you object and then by
Thank you.
object and function. And again, it's just and what I did was I pulled out the assessment because it would be double counting if I left the assessment piece in there.
Okay.
So it just gives you just a view looking at all five districts together of what we expended on. The other thing that I have is ADM. And eventually this bad news gets cranked into tax rates.
Chris, do you have all these, or do you want me to scan them and send them to you?
No, you don't, Chris. You don't have these.
I have some, but I don't think I have the last thing he just passed out. But you know what? I can come in and get it.
Yep, I'll have a copy for you. I just wanted to make sure.
So I just want to say ADM. So the state of Vermont from last year dropped to 2,840 students. And again, I think that's, we say 2% a year is the decrease where we're on. And I just think it transfers into as budgets get more expensive and school districts are still spending at an increasing rate while students are dropping. It's pretty easy to see where you're going to end up with property and taxation. Now, and again, December 1st, when the yields come out, we'll have a lot more clarity of where this is all going to go. That's all I have.
Okay, let me go to Karen for her question.
Well, one thing I wanted to say is that even though there's bad news here, it's good news because it's clear. I'm just going to say about that. The amount of work, Jim, that you've done to make it what it is, I just want to note that, that's all.
Well, thank you, Karen.
The question was, I think was raised was about how many substitutes there might be, right? And I hate to raise the COVID head, but we're in little COVID now. And I don't know about you, but I can count in my hands people who've had COVID recently.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say is that I know people have, some people have gotten, shots and all of that stuff, and they might not get really sick, but it's happening. And so I'm trying to figure out what we're thinking about that in terms of our health system and substitutes and, you know, whether that's connected to that or just regular flu that people are getting, you know, that's all I'm wanting to say. Because it is around. And, you know, I've been thinking about sort of where do I mask if I'm around people who are compromised and I don't want to carry anything or, you know, so I'm still thinking of those things.
Yeah.
And I'm wanting to mention that in terms of the substitute stuff, that there may be an increase, maybe this season because of colds and stuff like
You
that.
just get sick a lot more working in schools. And it's like, it's crazy that we give people a hard time about this in school. You are sick so much when you're in a school.
Oh, no,
Kids
no,
are
it's because little, I
constantly
mean, I think about little kids being like petri
They're-
dishes.
Yep.
Like,
They're lovely and gross at the same time.
Small kids, anyway.
Cheryl,
Yeah.
I would like to just, for our school,
Yeah.
clarification is, when we look at substitutes, we prefer not 18-year-olds teaching 18-year-olds.
Right,
That's all.
yeah,
Yes,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah, no,
So I have a question for you, Jim, and these additional handouts you've given us. The one where you showed all of the districts and it says at the top fiscal year 2025 budget by school. This is a projected. These are not approved budgets.
Those are not approved budgets, but it's where we are right now.
It's what's in development at each of the buildings and it
yes.
includes the most current estimates of the
Yes.
assessment for the SU.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So with that, maybe, yeah, I'm gonna echo Karen. I mean, even though you're bringing us bad news, the good news is we're actually, I think, digging it all up. I think
Yeah.
we're maybe finally at
getting it
the,
ahead of time, not after the fact.
right, all of that as well. So, I don't know whether, Chris, you might want, as chair of the finance committee, to make any comments about where the finance committee is in terms of working on, the budget with Jim and the rest of the members. Did you want to give folks a
Sure.
preliminary sense? Thank you.
Yep, let me give you an update. I'll start with the future. Our next finance committee meeting is Tuesday, the 28th at 3:00 at the SU. And it is, I think, possible that we're going to move a budget out of the committee at that point. This has been I think, a really tough budgeting cycle, and you guys mostly know the reasons for it. We had ESSER positions that are no longer going to be funded. There were 8 of them that were no longer going to be funded. So there's a question of what of those are going to be retained. We have already committed to a number of things that are kind of expensive, like, and that weren't in previous budgets, such as the bus lease, which was $200 and some thousand. Some software purchases from the central office. Health insurance came in at 16% increase. And that was really kind of a shock. That one alone, I think, was to our budget a $220,000 impact. And you know, these are things that you can't do anything about, you know. And then we go on to special ed, where special ed tuition is projected to be up by over $500,000, and there's some other special ed lines that are tough. So I think I speak for all of the members that when I say that we would like to be able to do more with the WNESU budget, but we would also like it to be smaller than it is. And so I'm hoping that by the time we meet on Tuesday, we'll do some additional whittling, but at the last iteration, the apples to apples increase in the budget was 6.23%. That was, I'm not sure how well that checks with what Jim just handed you, but it may not, because some things have been added in the budget that should have been there before that weren't before. But the apples to apples was a 6.23. The assessment increases were much more. Why, you ask? Well, because for one thing, other revenue is lower, and so the budget increase is not directly correlated with whatever your assessments are. So we're trying to whittle those down, and at the same time, we're trying to maintain some what we think would be smart things to do for students, such as bringing in the multi-tiered support system person into the regular budget. And that's kind of that and one other, I believe. Actually, that was the only one that we brought in out of the ESSER positions. So it's been tough. I'll go back to that again. It's been tough. There are a lot of pressures upward on the budget from things that we have already committed to that were not in previous budgets. And then there are these ESSER positions. And I'm sure maybe other members of the budget committee want to chip in at this point.
Cheryl, if I could just, for members here, for some reason that screen is frozen. Everything's functioning on my computer,
Yeah, I
so.
was wondering why his
So,
lips aren't
so
moving.
that's frozen. So Chris, you're frozen in this thoughtful pause, just so you know, and so is Jim and Karen. So on our screen, but I can see you perfectly fine. You're moving. I know you're alive and doing well. So I just wanted everyone to know. I just wanted everyone to know. I tried to fix it there. It wouldn't fix. So.
Do you hear anything? That's the question.
We can hear you loud and clear, though.
Well, good. I mean, if I'm looking thoughtful, that's, hey, it's a good deal.
Out of your mouth.
Not drooling or anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's done a very good job from
I
my
do too.
perspective,
Yeah,
yeah, in terms of the summary.
Very clear. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And so more to come. We'll hear more after the 28th meeting. Jim, thanks for everything.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Well, we've
Travel
got.
safely.
Will.
Oh, I'm.
Happy Thanksgiving. Jim.
Well,
Thank you.
on the SU budget, you brought up ESSER positions. How many ESSER positions did we include in this budget?
One.
That's
Just
one. Right.
Okay, thank you.
So there were eight that were funded by ESSER and one that we brought in. I think
Plus the
that's
tech
correct.
data support, plus the tech data support.
Well,
Chris.
that isn't in the budget yet.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think it was ESSER.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, keep from ESSER.
Okay, so more to come on that, right? So we've got a little bit of old business. Looking at the bylaws, we've been actually working on them for about 3 months at this point in time. We've discussed them, I think, both in committee and at this board level. And I think at this point in time, I'd like to suggest that it's time to take action. Right?
I move that we accept these bylaws as written.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Any discussion?
These have to be sent to the district.
Yes, we'll get to that. Right, we're not approving that these go into effect. What we are approving that they would be each then sent on to each of the school districts. Where they would be the ones that would take action to approve them and bring them back. But in order for us to move forward, at this point, given how much we've worked on it and how much we've discussed it, it just seemed appropriate to call for action tonight. Jim, you've got a comment.
I've got a comment. The reason I won't support it is if you look on page 5 of 7. On the,
Which is the article? What article?
it's Article 10.
And
In my copy, it's on
I don't have
page
a page.
4
Page
of
4.
7. But go ahead.
It says 5 of 7. It's Article 10.
Yeah, business properly to be transacted by the board.
Right, and if you look at the top of page 5,
Okay,
the second bullet is establishing an executive committee to undertake such lawful business and responsibilities as the board may impose. Okay, so that's in the draft, okay?
Mhm.
And so, because that's in the draft, my feeling is that if you go to page 3 of 7.
What, 3 of 7?
Oh, article, Jim, it's easier.
Oh,
if
it's
you say-
Article 8.
Article 8.
Thank you.
If originally way back, I think it was majority vote,
Majority
but
vote
they've
and
added and executive committee.
Mhm.
And I would strike executive committee and the second paragraph of Article 8.
Because you don't want an executive committee.
No, because it allows the bylaws on number 10
Yep,
allows the establishment of an executive committee.
right.
Okay, and I think that that gives the board and the chair of the board the ability to establish an executive committee. We still haven't talked about the responsibilities of it. I think putting this stuff in about, it's gonna be the chairs of the boards, of the other boards or their designees, and stuff like that is premature. And I think we'd be better off to just rely on section 10 and the powers that the chair has and that's Article
Article 10.
You're saying that
That's-
Article 10.
Article 3 is meetings, and Article 4 is duties of board officers and the board chair has the ability to set up ad hoc committees. We do have an ad hoc committee in the finance, there is a finance committee.
Mhm.
So anyway, I think it would be a better document to go to the other boards if that edit was made and just rely on section,
So,
the wording in section 10.
Oh.
And I personally am in favor of having an executive committee,
Yeah.
if you've got a good reason to have it, you know,
Yeah.
so.
so I'm trying to understand here, Jim, just, so you're suggesting that 8 be kept, right? And then,
The 10 be kept
okay,
and 8 be amended to drop the second paragraph.
right,
With Article 8, he wants to delete in the title and executive committee, and then he wants to delete the paragraph, the second
Yeah.
paragraph.
yeah, I get you. Okay, I got it, I got
Yeah.
you. Because it's already listed
Because
somewhere else.
we already have the power to establish an
So
executive.
what would be the title for 8?
Majority
Just
vote.
majority vote,
Majority vote.
which is the first paragraph. So that's my. Otherwise, I do appreciate the changes you made, but I think that would be a better document.
We should probably consider that a motion to amend this document in the way that Jigs has described. So Priscilla, help me with this. We would be voting on an amendment to,
If he's asking to amend it, then he will make the motion to amend. And bring about all of that information that's in there. The problem is that that's in the law to do it that way. It refers to it that way, and that's why it was put in there by the committee members, was put in based on what the law gives us under Title 16, Section 264. And that's why it's in there. The executive committee is then set up. The board would have to give the executive committee its responsibilities. It determines what those responsibilities are. The bylaws do not establish the responsibilities of
That's a
that
separate
committee.
issue.
Right,
And-
but
and-
that's why it's in there though, Jim. It's because that way the committee is in there. And then we can decide as a group what that committee exactly will do and limit it that way. Which is a better way, because otherwise you're leaving it just out there without.
I'm not leaving it,
establishing.
I'm saying that we have the right to establish an executive committee. And VSA Title 16, Section 264 deals with the majority vote. It doesn't deal with this paragraph below. So that's not correct, what you said.
Well, it's
So it's
the
the
VSA
same-
Title
same
16,
one on,
264 does.
Yeah, it's the same one on the one we say to keep.
But this language here is not section VSA 16204. The paragraph I'm suggesting we
This is
delete.
amended, you know, Title 16, Section 264 is this, right?
I don't have the law in front of me.
No.
No, I wouldn't, I'd just say,
But this is what I wanted to say. This is what it does say. In other words, this one section, which is about the executive committee, is Title 16, Section 264. This one up here is also, in other words,
that's also that section.
yeah, but they are both. And I think that's what Priscilla is saying. The reason that was there. So if we amend that by not having it.
No, but you see on section 10,
Yes, I got you.
okay, establish an executive committee.
Yep.
VSA Title 16, Section 264B. It's in there.
Yeah.
Okay, the paragraph that was added, okay, does not have a VSA reference. It doesn't have it.
It's right at the.
Well, they put it in, but
No,
It's there
it's
right
here, right here.
oh yeah, but this isn't from, this language here isn't from the law.
Not all of it is, that's
Not
correct.
all of it is, but it refers to the power to do that under
But that's in
Title
section 10.
16,
That's in
Section
section 10.
264. That's why your committee that did the bylaws put it in this way, because that identifies
So
it.
you want to be on the executive committee.
Not
So
necessarily.
Cheryl, if I may.
Yeah.
I think
And-
that,
So anyway,
I don't want to be on the executive.
Wait, hold on, Andy wants to say something.
I'm looking it up on my phone because
Perfect.
I've got this mirrored. VSA Title 16, Section 264A is about majority vote. B is about the establishment of an executive committee.
Mhm.
And so just based on just what you're saying that, and I see what you're saying is that it
that's in
talks about,
section
it talks
10.
it in the first paragraph, but in the second paragraph, if under the parentheses where it says amended 1983, it should reference B for that paragraph. If that made sense, what I just,
But
you know.
this
but-
language is not in section B of the law.
Some of
A
it
su-
is.
So section B of the law says a supervisory union may establish an executive committee consisting of the chair and no fewer than 2 additional directors.
Right. That's
The
what,
the
that's the law.
supervisory union shall enumerate in writing the specific powers and duties delegated to the executive committee, which will have the authority to act on behalf of the supervisory union within its delegated powers.
Right,
Right,
so
it's-
that is not what this says.
Okay, we wanted all of the boards represented
That's correct.
Well,
in
they-
the executive committee.
Chair can do that when she.
We
sets up-
wanted to guarantee that in our bylaws, that all of the boards would be represented and not just one board, which could happen the other way. So that's why we put it in that way, and that's why we felt it was important to have it in there so that all boards are represented.
And I don't
hear
have
you, but I
any
disagree
problem
with you.
with all boards being represented. I just don't like that language. I think the reference to to the, that you put in there with regards to the law is incorrect, because the law says the chair can appoint no less than 3, not this language.
That's correct.
That
So-
provides that.
So it's incorrect in this language.
There's nothing wrong with it. We had it legally reviewed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, just for the sake of it, I'll make the motion to drop the second paragraph of section 8.
All right, is there a second?
Okay.
Not that we need it, but is there a second?
Jig, you also want to drop the top heading, right?
Oh, the heading would change, yeah. Just.
All right, there's a motion on the floor, which is to change the title of the Article 8, dropping an executive committee and removing the second paragraph. That motion is on the floor. It would be an amendment to the prior motion. All those in favor of this motion to drop the language?
I'm sorry, Carrie, you're gonna need to do a roll call because you have Chris on.
Right, I
Yeah,
will.
no, I just want to, yeah, that's,
Okay.
sorry.
So, but what we are voting on at this time is a motion to amend Article 8, to drop the words in the title and executive committee, and to delete the paragraph that begins a supervisory union may establish. And so roll call vote, starting with you, Chris. If you're in support of the
I
motion.
am not in agreement with either of the speakers on this, and would like a different wording altogether, but I'm gonna vote no on this motion.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just do a roll call. Jigs?
Yes.
Okay, Karen?
I need to understand something here before I do the roll call.
Uh-huh.
As long as it's in here that an executive committee can be established.
Uh-huh.
In 10,
Correct?
then I say,
It's in
I-
10,
I'm
but
just-
you need it referred to in the other so that you have what it is.
It is in
I abstain.
All right. No. Lynn is a no, all right. Team?
No.
June?
I'm going to abstain also.
All right. Priscilla?
No.
Jason?
Yes.
Okay. Four no's, 2 yeses, 2 abstentions, and so the motion fails. There is a motion on the floor now to accept these proposed amended bylaws for the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union. With this being the case, that then the bylaws would be sent to each of the individual school districts to take action on them. The SU board does not have the power to put them into effect. Okay, so that motion is on the floor. Chris, the question on the floor, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Jigs?
No.
Okay. Karen?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, team?
Yes.
June?
I have a question.
Okay.
So if this goes to the individual boards, the high school board could vote no, and then it would have to come back to the drawing board of the SU committee?
Mhm.
Okay, I say yes.
Priscilla?
Yes.
Jason?
No.
Okay, all right, the bylaws passed, they will be sent out to each of the individual school districts. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody to put the effort into doing those.
All right, the next item is about the executive committee, and I was just going to point out that currently the only responsibility of the executive committee is what's specified in the superintendent's contract, which is that the executive committee is by that contract responsible for managing the evaluation of the superintendent and then bringing recommendations to the full board. The executive committee has no authority to take any specific action other than do what's described there. These bylaws, if they are approved, ask that then the SU board put in writing the specific duties of the executive committee. So that would still be done. And thirdly, the superintendent evaluation process, as specified in the superintendent's contract, is underway. We've had a committee looking at evaluation processes, one of which is to propose to use a very simple, straightforward survey that would go out widely to all audiences, staff, students, teachers, community members, that kind of thing. And it's in the format of what's called a Likert scale, which is one of those that goes from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and people can say not applicable if they don't have direct experience to assess the superintendent's work in this area. The document only reflects the actual responsibilities as written in the superintendent's contract. So they span from educational leadership through accountability for budgets. They also reflect his goals. So it's congruent with that, but in a straightforward, kind of easy for people, kind of consumer friendly format. This kind of approach is recommended in the literature. I've used it, Karen's used it in a variety of settings. It gives you a statistical number as well as subjective anecdotal comments that would be helpful to the superintendent and all of us in an overall evaluation. This will only be one part of our support for the superintendent in this process. But I think our next step is that we would work then with the superintendent staff to use your, whether it's thought exchange or something like that, to get the instrument out widely. And one of the things we can do with the results is be able to see the overall assessment, but also to see how does the staff respond, how do board members respond, how do students respond. So it'll give us kind of a profile.
So this will go to everyone?
Yes.
Parents?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's that. That was just an informational update there. And with that, I think we'll move on to director's comments. Okay. Chris, we'll start with you.
I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jix.
All set.
Okay, Karen.
I just want to thank everybody for the amount of effort they put in today.
Well said.
I'm all set. Thank you.
All right. Jason.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, just keep our country, our town, our state, I guess, our town, and all of our students in all of our schools and staff and everybody in our prayers as we also think about those people in other countries where they're in a state of war, and know that there's good people everywhere who are working hard to hopefully share kindness and goodness in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just want to say here, this has been a really robust meeting. It's been thoughtful. I really enjoyed it. I actually enjoy seeing each of you and working with you. I'm looking at the tone in the room now, and it had been a little more upbeat earlier, and now it's just a little more somber. And I want to say thank you and be of good cheer and enjoy the holiday season and see you at our upcoming meetings. So thanks, everybody.
This meeting was recorded by Falls Area Community Television, located at 1 Hospital Court, Bellows Falls, Vermont. If you would like a copy of the meeting, our phone number is 802-463-1613, or email us at fact810@gmail.com. Falls Area Community TV, keeping government honest.